we hear things here at ExecuNet like, gosh, am I too old to be leaning into this? Or, I don't have a sales and marketing background. Is this something that I could possibly even imagine doing? Or my experience is in sector A, and, I see these cool service-based franchises in sectors B through Z. How could I do this? Those are the things we commonly hear. Let's bust some myths.
Yeah, happy to. And I would say, people often ask me, why don't people do this? And I would say for the majority of people I meet, it's their own fears, self-limiting beliefs. We even refer to them as emotional detours, because sometimes it's easier to put those obstacles in your own way so you don't actually have to go through the effort of let me explore it, right? So it's easier to say, oh, it takes too much money or I'm too old or whatnot. Um, let's take the one of maybe I'm too old to start this. I looked at some data that my franchisor provided, across the system of the people that we work with, and what I found, and it sort of jives with my client base too, 50% of our clients are 50 or older. And we have a pretty good number that are even in their 60s because a lot of times people don't want to stop working. I mean, they might want to stop working in corporate America. They don't want to stop working entire, they want to do something that's meaningful they want to do. So I don't think you're ever really too old. I mean, it depends on your circumstances, but I think that's a myth. If you're doing something you love, you're not going to be digging ditches, right? You're not going to be doing physical work. You're going to be managing people or doing something else. I'm 60 myself. And I have friends that are getting close to retirement age, and they're all say, "Hey, when are you going to retire?" I'm like, "Why would I want to retire? I love what I do. I'm going to do this for the next 10 or 15 years. I'm work 20 hours a week. I love what I do. Why would I stop?" Right? So I think that's a common myth, and it's obviously tied to the individual, but I don't think I've yet to run into someone that I really felt was too old, to do this if it's the right thing for them to do. I've also heard people think it takes more money than I have or I care to commit. I know we're going to talk about funding sources in a little bit. It's going to take too long to replace my corporate income. That's another common myth. I mean, it's going to take a little bit of time, but it usually doesn't take as long as people think because I think they sort of equate this with starting your own independent business, which could take a long time to make money. The whole idea behind a franchise, it compresses the learning curve so you're making money sooner than you would if you were doing this on your own. So I think those are the common myths, or probably one of the biggest ones is I'll know it when I see it, or I've got to find a product or service that I love. So I need to optimize around my affinity for the product or service. And I would say that's probably the least important thing. I think you have to believe in the product or service, but one of the things we try to help people understand is you have to really enjoy the role of the owner in that business. So you got to believe in the product or service, you got to stand behind it, but you really have to have a strong affinity with the role that's required for the owner in that particular type of franchise. That's really what we're trying to help people solve for. The role fit, work-life balance fit. If you get those two right, usually the money takes care of itself.
Right. I want to share one more, Gus, that occurred to me.
Sure.
I often hear from people, which goes like this. I've been in operational leadership roles my entire career, 20, 30, 40 years.
Right.
I've been the guy in charge or the woman in charge.
Yeah.
And a franchise will quote unquote restrict my creativity because
Mm.
it is sort of a controlled environment. Like
Yeah.
people have said things like, well, it's a business in a box. Let's
Right.
talk about that a bit, please.
Yeah, I mean, and I could see where somebody would think that, and there's probably a kernel of truth. And I mean, there's certain businesses like probably like McDonald's where you don't have a lot of degrees of freedom, in terms of how you run your particular, unit, especially like retail food. But I can speak as a franchise owner, and I've helped a lot of other people. Most of these concepts, you have lots of degrees of freedom. Yes, there's a roadmap right around, hey, we're going to help you with the marketing, or we have a certain go-to-market strategy or operational plans or whatnot. But then there are lots of degrees of freedom. Even in my own business, I've pivoted my franchise where most of my clients come to me via referral, versus other forms of outreach that my franchisor provides me, because that's how I wanted to evolve my practice. I coach my clients exactly the way that I was taught because, quite frankly, I feel like that's the best way to help my clients get where they need to go. So, yeah, there are going to be some parameters, but I think if you're going to go the franchise route, you have to realize those parameters aren't there to constrain you. They're designed to help optimize your efficiency and get you from point A to point B with the least amount of time, effort, and money. And then there's still always opportunities to innovate on I don't even say on the margins, innovate in your business, as evidenced by in most franchises, if you look at their distribution of performance across their franchisees. An average performer might produce X result income. Top performers usually do 2 or 3X because they're doing something in addition to the core platform, right? So they innovate within that framework.
Yeah. And perhaps the most salient myth of all, drum
Yeah.
roll please, is franchising equals, and you touched on this earlier, franchise equals fast food, franchise equals McDonald's. So not true, right? And we're talking now executive level stuff.
Yeah.
I know that a lot of executives are curious about service-based businesses and other forms of franchises that are more, shall we say, elevated for the executive market. Talk to us about those, please.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, it's funny because, we mentioned like how many people I've helped. So the 400 people that I've helped go into a franchise, not a single one has gone into a retail food service concept.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you shouldn't. I would advise against it. But there's some people who maybe should. I think it's a different animal. Um, for most of the people that I work with, yeah, service-based businesses, non-retail, but there's a place for retail, particularly when we talk about semi-absentee. But there are all sorts of different home and business services where you can either operate as the general manager or, build an organization or build a team of, people that are providing services to consumers and homeowners. Or if you're more inclined to B2B, there are some great B2B concepts. My concept sort of falls in that space. I've had clients go to leadership training, sales training, IT services, marketing service. There are all sorts of, the key is to find something that's a good fit for you. But yeah, food service is just, it's kind of like the tip of the iceberg. It's what everybody sees and what
Yes.
everybody equates to
Right.
franchising. But like there's that whole part of the iceberg that's underneath that to me is where the interesting concepts lie.
Absolutely. And another myth, and then we'll move on from here because there's so
Yeah.
much to cover everyone, but um, you're not restricted if unless you want to do this full time. You could do the semi-absentee model as well, which is a little more freedom. Talk to us about that. I mean, how you make
Yeah.
those choices for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it depends on the individual and their circumstances. I would say probably about 30% of my clients explore semi-absentee, 70% full-time. Usually the people who are exploring full-time, it's either I've been downsized and I don't know that I'm going to find another comparable job in corporate America, or I'm done with corporate America. I'm all in, right? But it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. There's a whole subset of franchises that either are designed to be semi-absentee or could go kind of either way, depending on how the complement of people. So I have plenty of clients that are like, yeah, I'm probably 4 or 5 years away from wanting to leave corporate America. But boy, it would be great if I could start something now on the side, investing maybe 10, 15 hours a week that, in 2, 3, 4 years could be replacing my corporate income, and that becomes my exit strategy. Or it just becomes a means of diversification. I've had people do that with their spouses. Maybe they had a spouse that wasn't working outside the home. They took over, ran it semi-absentee. I just had another client this year where he's retiring from corporate America, but he's opening a business with his 3 sons, adult sons. They're going to run the day to day, and he's going to provide, well, he provided the financing, but he also providing strategic guidance. But for him, it's kind of like a semi-absentee retirement business, and the sons are really going to run the day to day. So I think there are a lot of ways to play in this space, that people aren't even aware of. So it really depends on your own circumstances and what you're looking for the business to do for you.